and welcome back to the live series podcast brought to you by Amicus. This is the podcast that brings you insight into the life and role of tech leaders from all over the world. Today, I'm joined by Simon Ince, CTO over at Luno. Hiya, Simon. How are you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Hello. I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Lovely, lovely. I was a little bit nervous just with my accent and Luno. I feel like something about my accent just doesn't quite do the word justice. It's almost quite an elegant word, really, isn't it? But then my little
Well,
north
whatever you say, don't say Luna, because some of my friends confuse Luno, which is us, the cryptocurrency exchange, with Luna, which is a coin which had a bad history, shall we say?
Oh dear.
So yeah,
All
don't
right.
confuse the two.
All right, well, I'll stick with
Yeah,
Luno then, regardless of my accent.
yeah, perfect
So,
accent.
like I said, you're CTO for Luno. So, for anyone that hasn't heard of Luno or isn't familiar with any of your kind of work or career, do you want to maybe just walk us through your career up to this point?
Yeah, sure. Not a straight line, I guess, is probably the quite a common answer, but probably one of the advantages I've had. So I started out, my first job was in testing children's hearing and fitting hearing aids, which was completely different to what I do nowadays. So I finished school and got a job doing that in the Children's Hospital in Sheffield, where I live. But while I was there, they replaced the database systems, and that was kind of my first exposure to software and how helpful it can be. And I ended up in this kind of lucky position, I guess, where I understood the business, if you like, of running clinics and testing kids, that kind of stuff. And I understood some of the tech because I'd been writing basics since I was 8 on the ZX81, that kind of stuff. And so I ended up as this kind of go-between, and it really, I guess, it meant that the first exposure I had to doing that professionally was very firmly rooted in why we were doing it and what value was it bringing and all that kind of stuff. But then, so after that, I realized that actually that could be quite fun to do professionally. So I left, went to university, and I guess my career in its current form properly, just nodding at my postman, how post-lockdown world is that? But yeah, so I guess that my career properly started after university there. And so I started at the Sheffield Health Authority, the DBA and bits and bobs like that. And then moved to Capgemini, where I think I was there for about 7 years, and worked my way up the ranks from an software engineer, through to kind of team lead. And I spent more and more time at whiteboard and talking about kind of process and architecture and all that kind of stuff, and running bigger and bigger teams. And after a while, I realized that I'd gotten really far from the tech, and I didn't feel ready for that. So I left Cap and moved to and spent the first half of my career there, probably about 5 years or so, consulting on kind of writing code all the way through to process and architecture and stuff like that. And kind of did the same curve again. Like I got deep into the tech to start with, and then people realized actually a lot of my skills were process, architecture, leadership, that kind of stuff. And while I was there, it broadened over time. And so I was really good at the kind of how do we build software and that kind of process piece. And then I started asking questions about, well, why are we building that software and what does the customer think of it? And started getting really interested in that stuff. And at that point, I'm not entirely sure how I convinced someone that I should move into a business development role, having never really held an in quotes business role before. I'd always had very technical jobs. I moved into a business development role working with the Microsoft's consumer partners. The team looked after everyone from kind of Facebook through to TomTom, and I worked with a lot of the kind of music partners. So people like Spotify and Shazam and SoundCloud, but also Viber, like messaging, those kind of companies. And that just completely accelerated and changed my perspective on so much about the industry and what mattered. Yeah, so that was absolutely fascinating period. And then so after that, my job was basically coming up with cool things to do with those consumer partners. So like, what could Spotify and Xbox do together that would be cool and would drive customer growth or monetization or something for both? And so towards the end of it, I had all these great ideas, whether they came from me or from other people, that I was championing, but I couldn't really make them real. And so when I left, what I was looking for was something that put my neck on the line to actually deliver things and see them get into customers' hands. So at that point, I moved to Sky Betting and Gaming to run their international engineering team. And that was all. So that was kind of bringing those skills together, if you like. So a lot of if you looked at that point at my history, I got this kind of technical depth. I'd run kind of reasonably sized engineering teams. I've done a lot of the kind of whiteboard architecture and all that kind of stuff. And then I developed this huge kind of commercial marketing, kind of go-to-market product kind of mindset while I was in this business development role. And I was trying to put those together really just to actually have a real tangible impact on customers. And so that was absolutely incredible experience working for Sky Bet for 5 years or so and working my way through there, ended up running really big parts of the UK team. And then about 2 years ago, left there to come to Luno to run the entire engineering team, and my remit's grown there over time. So now I run the product engineering, InfoSec, and IT operations teams.
Amazing.
Not quite as much of a whirlwind as you might have wanted, but there's my potted history.
No, well, you said it wasn't a straight line, and you're absolutely right, weren't you there? But it like you said, with your experience, it's a very, very well-rounded CV, isn't it? Really, when you think about it, and especially with, I think when you mentioned Xbox with Spotify, I was like, oh, that sounds pretty not at all what I was expecting you to be mentioning. So that's super interesting. I know you mentioned as well, talking about kind of managing various size teams and things, in terms of, you know, obviously not all of them were specifically tech teams, but in terms of managing, say, a small or large team, I just kind of want to talk about like culture a little bit, and how from a managerial position you manage culture regardless of team size, or maybe the team size does matter, but what's your kind of approach to that?
Good question. I think so there's a couple of tangible things I do with it. I guess the real basic is engage with the team and have fun. And I don't mean that to sound too simplistic, but I think it's really important to be proactively booking things. So everything from kind of all hands to social events, those kind of things, taking the team out for a drink if you're there, or just sitting in the canteen at lunchtime and just being very present. But then also encouraging them to be doing things when you're not there. So I think we call our small teams pods, which a lot of people might call squads or something like that. And I think it's very important that they are spending time together, not just in the day job. And that's how you kind of seed and transmit that culture, if you like. And I think it's incredibly important. So when I joined Luno, one of the reasons I joined was culture, and I specifically looked for somewhere that I thought was a good fit with how I like to work. But you need to maintain that, and obviously we've grown the team hugely, so you need to keep kind of spreading that culture to new hires. And so I think all of that is really important stuff to do. But from a leadership point of view, there's two. I think basically you need to be really intentional about how you do it, and tell people what you think the culture should be and how you like to work. And so I have two tools that I use to do that. The first is what I call a leadership philosophy, which actually is something that was taught to me, I think, during Microsoft time when I was in a leadership program there. And basically, it's just a very simple way of expressing what you value as a leader and what you stand for. And actually, when I was at Skybet, at some point, the COO, as he was at the time, he went on to even higher ranks, actually. But when he was the COO, he said to me something along the lines of that he didn't know what I stood for. And we had this fascinating conversation where he'd made assumptions about me that were far miles away from how I like to work, and completely the opposite, really. In fact, he thought I was an empire builder and things like that. And actually, like, I enjoy, definitely enjoy like growing remit, but that's not my motivating factor. It's the opposite of what I'd be trying to do for the business, really. And so I wrote it down in a blog post, and I refer back to that all the time now. And it just calls out like, I think it might be 7 bullets about what I value from a leadership point of view, and what I hold my team to, and what I want them to hold me to. So it's something that I've had for, I mean, it must be the best part of a decade now. I keep going back to revisit it and think maybe it needs a tweak, and I can't really improve it. But I only wrote it down maybe 5 years ago, so, and kind of published it publicly. So that I cling to a lot, and that's got things like be wrong in there. So I think it's very important as a leader to be comfortable publicly acknowledging when you're wrong. Because if you don't do it, then how can you possibly expect your team to come to you and admit that something's gone wrong? And I would always rather be focusing on okay, what has happened? How do we fix it? Than any kind of blame culture. And so there's really important things about things like that I think shape the culture very intentionally. So our leadership culture is one. And the other thing I've called a leadership manifesto, which is trying to explain to my direct reports how I'm going to work with them. And that's things like that I'll default to coaching, but that if I get directive, then they better jump, that kind of thing. But the way I describe it primarily is the kind of two sides of the same coin. The first is that my job is building a team that's stable, that can be really effective, that can operate when I'm not there, and that can take punches is how I describe it sometimes, that can really be resilient and withstand the challenges of day-to-day work. But the flip side is that I then want to throw the punches, saying, why are we doing that? Could we do that better? Why aren't we going faster? Do we need someone to cover this? Have you thought about changing a structure and all those kind of things? And that only works if you've kind of got the trust from the first half, if you like. So it's very easy to be very critical. But if you haven't already told them you've got their back and that you'll help build them and make them successful, then you just don't get the same kind of response. So I think those kind of things help shape how I interact a lot with my directs, like them to the core fundamental things I believe in, which then kind of cascade across the team. And I probably bore the team with sharing this stuff with them once every 6 months or so and reiterating it, and they think I'm off on one again, but it still goes in, and I still think it makes a difference.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned about having that kind of 7 bullet point sort of leadership blog, the first word that came in my head was kind of a manifesto sort of vibe, but then you said it yourself as well. So I think it's a really good approach to have, to be honest. And it just kind of lays the land for everybody and makes your expectations very clear. And then you're also asking for transparency from your team as well on feedback for yourself, and that's a very healthy thing to do, isn't it, for a leader? So let's talk about kind of how you support like team members then, because obviously presumably I understand Luno is probably one of the larger teams that you've kind of managed in your career, but in terms of size or anything like that, I don't know if that plays a part. But how do you kind of help your team members to grow within their roles? Like, do you prioritize internal promotions? Do you kind of bring new people in and then kind of help, how do you kind of manage the structure, and how do you encourage kind of individual growth as well?
I think whether or not I prioritize internal promotions depends on the state of the team. So if you look at when I first joined Luno, it's actually quite a bit smaller when I joined than I'd managed before, but it's probably slightly bigger now. But it depended what they needed, and at that time they had 2 really strong kind of engineering leaders, but that wasn't enough to manage the whole team. And there was more we needed to do to develop the team internally before there were other people ready to step up. So I prioritized hiring really solid people externally. That's the idea there, is to kind of equip the team with some really capable leaders at the top that can then start bringing everyone with them. So I think if you find a team that's kind of promising, got really good people there, but kind of lacking that level of leadership, then I'd go external, because it can take you a long time to kind of grow people to where you want them to be to move them forwards. With that said, I think it's very important to make sure that there are career paths and there's internal growth as well. And actually, we've just promoted someone to that kind of leadership level relatively recently from within the ranks, and she's got huge advantages in that she's got so much history with the company. She knows so much more about how some of the day-to-day works than perhaps I'm trying to avoid saying those were sat in an ivory tower, because I don't believe in sitting in an ivory tower, but you can certainly end up one step removed. And so I think the the value that brings to bringing people through and into the leadership team is huge, because it rounds you out better and gives you a lot more kind of context. So I think that's really important. But from the point of view of how I develop people, I am Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup, wrote a book called The Leader's Guide as well. It's not as kind of world changing as Lean Startup, but it's interesting. And there's one concept in there where he's talking about how to create kind of entrepreneurial behavior and how to really encourage people to be creative and things like that. And he refers to it as islands of freedom, I think. And I like the idea there, because I think a lot of growth is about being given the opportunity to prove yourself and to find your own path with some mentoring and coaching. And so I even wrote something about this called Islands of Trust, where for me it's you kind of have to put your own neck on the line to empower the people that work for you in order for them to be able to do it their way so they can learn from it. And so there's this whole kind of concept of calculated trust in my head around how much rope can I give this person to do it their own way, and I'll give them some guidance and some kind of guardrails maybe about like to play and go do it. And that space gets broader and broader as they get more senior. So I like to do a lot of that kind of thing, because it teaches, well, first of all, you have to embrace failure. You have to be ready that some of those risks you're taking will not pan out and something will go wrong. And I think that's a good learning opportunity, but it also potentially costs you personally as the leader, because if your team is not delivering, then you have to be able to represent that you're still on it. And so that's something I am pretty comfortable with, I'd say, but within, you've got to have boundaries there, right? But so embrace failure. That lets them learn themselves, but also understand how to coach them to spot when something might go wrong. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, as you move up the leadership ranks, knowing when to kind of intercept a team and kind of get involved and ask them some hard questions, that kind of thing. So those are a lot of the areas that I spend time on for growing kind of my leadership team and the layer below them to be ready for it.
Yeah, for sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think that whole kind of idea of learning how to kind of relinquish control, almost, not that you're coming across as a controlling person, but the responsibility is completely yours in essence of what your team does. And it's a very basic idea of you're responsible for their actions, but they have to be responsible for the outcome, if that makes sense. And I think that's
Yep.
kind of your way of relinquishing sort of control is not relinquishing responsibility, and that's quite a tricky balance to get, isn't it? But I think you know, it sounds like you've got that down pretty well. So in terms of let's talk hiring, because I know you spoke a little obviously about one of your colleagues there who's kind of risen through the ranks, and that sounds like a really good shout, to be fair, I think, when somebody's been at the company a while as well. But when you do hire, what does your process look like? What kind of approach do you take? Is it quite an intense, fast hiring process, or is it, you know, do you prefer tech tests and things like that?
Yeah, we've iterated on this quite a lot, actually. And I would say when I first joined, I think we had something like a 7-stage interview process, and there was even like, I can't remember, I might be exaggerating here, but I'm sure it was like 2 to 3 hours worth of coding tests and all that kind of stuff. That was before you even spoke to anyone. And I guess the reason that worked is because our brand is so strong in some places. So in South Africa, for example, we're an incredibly strong brand. People know us as a kind of a consumer brand as well as an employer. And so, you know, they want to work for us. In the UK, that's probably less so, and it, you know, differs across other countries just as we're growing the consumer brand. So in the early days, I think it kind of worked because we were trying to hire like the very thin sliver, I can barely say that, of the best. And so having that kind of people that were really motivated to get involved, would really dedicate the time to doing that, worked. But I think as you start scaling up and you go, and also the market gets more competitive, all sorts of things changing over the past few years. The reality is you've got to sell your company as much as they're trying to sell themselves to you as well. And so I think we had it wrong, and it started becoming more and more painful. It also starts becoming a huge amount of effort, and like the time drain on the team when you're trying to hire a lot of people was huge. So we've been going through iterations of trying to refine that. So now we have a tech test before we interview you, but it's kind of, I think it's probably circa 20 minutes, something like that. And it's just to kind of screen the real basics, make sure like we're hiring someone here that knows what they're talking about, but it's not as thorough as it might have used to have been. And then we have an interview structure which is targeted at kind of culture fit, but kind of quite tangible culture fit. So I'll talk about that in a sec. And then we have kind of whiteboard style interview, and then a paired programming kind of interview. So the idea, I think, is really important when you're hiring engineers, that you see them writing code and you give them a chance to shine, if you like. The hiring interview is very much, we have something called Moontality, which should probably be trademarked, but was not my naming, which comes from our founders, I think. And it really is it's another list that I guess a bit like my leadership philosophy, but of things that we as a company value as our culture, and how we work together. So it's got things there like win together, which there is kind of talking about collaboration, and that we're not a politics heavy organization. We don't like that kind of stuff. So really we're looking for people that fit well with those attributes as well. So that means we've got a much more streamlined process. We try and do a couple of the technical interviews on the same day if we can, all that kind of stuff, and get to offer as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think the paired coding activity, I know it's quite common now, and it's I think it's come up quite a few times where people kind of sack off tech tests and would rather do the paired coding activities, because it's also, you get a bit of best of both worlds. You're getting a little bit of a culture fit as well, and you're also getting to see their technical skills, and it's a little bit more practical. And I think you're right as well, that it's the tech tests thing, and I like to talk about it because some people are adamant that they 100% should always be involved in a process, and some people adamant that they shouldn't, and that they're a waste of time, and I can sort of see it from both sides really. But I think I like what you said in terms of it was literally just a practical decision for you, because who's marking the tech tests at the end of the day? It's a big time consuming thing to have to keep on top of, especially expanding. So so
it also depends on the person as well. I think it's really interesting. So if you're effectively headhunting for like a really senior engineer that you want a specific role, and then the first contact is, hey, would you go and fill in this tech test for them, when they've got this CV as long as your arm of like brilliant things they've delivered? It just makes absolutely no sense. And so I think we've built in a bit more kind of pragmatism as well to decide when to do it.
Yeah, I mean, even sort of entry level developers can sometimes have a really extensive GitHub that kind of would put you off sending them a tech test.
True. Yep.
Yeah, so you're right, it does totally just depend on the person. And maybe we've covered a little bit of it there, but do you want to maybe just go into some more depth of kind of how you set standards within hiring? And I mean, it doesn't have to be specifically for Luno either. I mean, in terms of your own individual approach as a leader towards hiring, and what kind of things do you look out for specifically for yourself that you want to kind of have people working for you, or just walk me through that.
Okay, yeah. So again, from the setting standards point of view, I like to see their work thing. I give them a chance to shine. I think that's really important, no matter which role you're hiring. So if that's engineers, it's write me some code. But if it's leadership roles or something like that, then I want them to tell me about something they're proud of. So I built this team that did something great, or whatever it is that they're proud of, and let them tell the story from their own point of view. I think that's really important, because you can quite often end up with interviews that are very kind of answer this question, answer that question, and you're kind of limited by your own understanding of how that role could be done. And the whole point is you're trying to hire someone that is probably going to be better in that role than you are. I like to believe that all of the people that work for me are far better in their jobs than I would be. I probably suck at being an engineering director now. And so allowing them to showcase what they can do, I think, helps you broaden the skills that you pull into your team. So that's one pretty important thing. From a every technology role, I think it's important. So something I learned early on, in fact, my first job at the health authority, I had a boss called Phil, who was brilliant because I was doing a DBA and other stuff job. And Phil encouraged me to read all of the Oracle manuals and to understand how it did things and why it worked like that and what was the difference between a bitmap index and I can't remember the name of the other indexes. That's embarrassing. But anyway, all that kind of stuff, and to understand like how a lot of that stuff works and therefore why it made sense to use them under certain circumstances. And then that was played forwards when I joined Microsoft as a technical consultant, and the hiring that we did there to get really, really strong technical people was often, why does it work like that? Like, how does garbage collection work, and what does that mean about how you should structure your software? And so I think depending on the role, it changes what kind of questions or what level of how and why you ask. But I like to make sure that they understand kind of why they're doing things and how they fit together, rather than just, well, I know how to define a class or whatever it might be. So, and I think that also applies to leadership roles. So, oh, well, you have a community of practice or a guild or whatever you call it. Well, why? What you're trying to achieve with those things. And so that is often a big thing that I push for. And then the really hard roles to hire for, I think, are so for example, when I joined Luno, we had 2 engineering directors, and I wanted a delivery director and an engineering operations director. So delivery director is all about kind of agile practices and coordination and some of the kind of I don't know if I dare say this word, but like reporting and things like that, which I know agile people might think is an anti-pattern, but there's a place for it with the right amount. So those kind of things. And the engineering operations director is very much about service stability, operations, SRE, all of those kind of things, incident management, and those kind of critical things to stability, which you need if you're handling people's money. And those roles are really hard to hire for because there's so many people out there that would apply saying, well, I'm a project manager. I don't want a project manager because we are firmly rooted in agile. Or when you say operations manager or operations director, you can get some very odd people applying. So to try and identify who I want for those, I tend to identify what I would say are kind of indicators of the caliber that I want. And so, for example, in engineering operations director, I've got brilliant people in these roles now, by the way. Mark's the ops director and Karen's the delivery director. But for Mark, I might say, tell me about error budgets. Now, that's not something that a lot of companies use, and he might not use it, but I'd expect him to at least have a bit of an idea about it or something like that and be able to talk about it. And maybe it isn't that, and maybe they don't know about everything you ask, but there's different kind of indicators that show me that they're kind of plugged into the industry, that they're thinking broadly, they're talking to people, all that kind of thing. So I think those are the things I use to try and shoot for high caliber.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's funny that you say that.
I guess you also asked, like, how do you maintain it, though?
Yeah,
sorry, go on after you.
No, sorry. I was literally just going to kind of follow on with that. To be honest, I was going to say like how, because you kind of just exactly said that. I was going to sort of say, how do you sustainably kind of measure your standards when you're hiring? What kind of red flags do you look for? Does it become more of a kind of just avoiding red flags, or does it become a little bit more kind of, you can give and take a little bit? Do you compromise a little bit more? How do you kind of, keep those consistent standards?
I think so. One thing that we did that made a big difference. So if you look at our hiring, we have hired so many people in South Africa, in particular in Cape Town, that you sort of start saturating the market. And it's much less so in the UK and in Indonesia, actually, where we've got a small team. But that meant that we have something called remote but reachable, which is our take on kind of remote working, which is basically we'll hire people in the countries where we've got an office space and we expect you to come to the office occasionally so that we can connect face to face. So it's more nuanced than that, but that's the basis of it. But that meant that all of a sudden it opened up a whole. So across the rest of the UK, the same role that you probably would want to hire. All of a sudden don't only have to get them from London. I can get them from Manchester or Sheffield or Leeds or wherever. And so it opens up a huge amount more bandwidth from the point of view of maintaining those standards. So that made a big difference. From the point of view, kind of red flags, I think mentality is one of the key things. So it's that kind of cultural fit. So I don't want ego. I don't want politics. I don't. And another one that I think is really important that I say to everybody I'm hiring is you've got to be able to handle change. You've got to be comfortable with it because the stage that we're in as a company, teams move around every 2 months. People move around, priorities change, and if you can't deal with that level of change, then it's not that kind of scale up or startup style business. The same is true at Skybet. Like it's not for you. So that's another really key one. So I think it is kind of. I'm sure there's a positive side to it as well, rather than the red flags. Like they're looking for people that really embody the cultural things that we're looking for is key. But those kind of avoiding the person that's going to be a bit too all about me, or they're going to be what I'd call a preacher, which is like they've got their favorite thing, but they feel like it's the answer to everything and things like that. Those are the things that I try and avoid.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. Like, just looking for red flags is not it's not the way to hire. But generally, I would say that's a great shout, especially with you saying how. Because again, I was going to kind of just ask, with you being so global, I was going to ask about your kind of hybrid model that it sounds like you're working on and hiring within that. Did you say that Luno's always been remote? Is that right, or is it kind of the whole time you've been there?
No, the opposite actually. So before lockdown, it was I wasn't here, but from what I understand, a 99% in the office. And obviously lockdown completely changed that. And as we were coming out of lockdown, I guess just listening to the industry and listening to the people, I think before it was going to be everybody back to the office, people were starting to say, if there's not clarity on what we're doing from a remote working point of view, then I might move role to another company where there is clarity, because people have made life decisions and moved out of the city, all that kind of stuff in all the countries we were in. So we spent a long time kind of trying to work out what would work for us. And I guess the challenge is that we have this saying that we value in-person connection, and we do really believe that kind of connection you build face to face makes a difference. And so we didn't want to go just 100% remote at that point. We wanted to be able to have some kind of in-person connection. That's why we landed on this kind of, but also we didn't want to do you must be in the office 2 days a week, because often people mandate you must be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or whatever it is. Well, that's fine, except I have to do the school run on a Wednesday. So that's not the great day for me to be in the office. And someone else I know, they've got to pick up their aging parent on a Monday. So that's a bad day for them. And like the reality is lockdown shifted people's perspective on the work-life balance. And I think that's the important thing to retain. So we're trying to find a balance there. And so that kind of, we bring people together for key events and things like that to help build that in-person connection and encourage people to do it when they think it makes sense as well. Is something we've gone for. So I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure we'll iterate more on it over time, but we've been pretty successful so far, I'd say.
Yeah, it sounds it. It definitely sounds it. In terms of, I mean, we work hybrid here at Amicus as well, and it's absolutely great. You've got a lot of flexibility and freedom with it, and I think you're right. I think lockdown really did change everybody's perspective and everyone's priorities with it, and it kind of opened up your eyes to just how a little better quality of life everybody could have actually if more companies kind of adapted towards it. And so I think you're getting it right by the sounds of it anyway, is what I'm trying to say, because it sounds like a great hybrid model that you're working on. So in terms of, just to go back to you individually as a leader, how do you kind of, I know you mentioned early on in the episode about transparency being a really key kind of trait for you. How do you kind of go about getting your own reviews and your own feedback for you from your team or from anybody that you kind of work with? How do you kind of approach that without just kind of saying, what am I like to work with, and just expecting someone to be like, yeah, fine? How do you kind of get through that barrier?
Yeah, good question. I've done some interesting things with this before, actually, but I guess the most important one is the element of my leadership philosophy that says be wrong, and a few other kind of complementary things in there. And I think really living and demonstrating that I'm very comfortable people calling me out and or disagreeing with me and all that kind of thing is really important. So I do absolutely see that my direct reports and broader will pipe up and say, I actually think we could have do this differently, and me saying, good shout, yeah, we should. That just sets the culture, and that means that I get fairly constant kind of not exactly feedback, but kind of things to help me tune into, am I getting it right? Is it landing well? Um, those kind of things. And then probably more specific feedback in one-to-ones as well. So I do encourage that and ask for it regularly. But I've done a few other kind of things. So the first one is when I first joined Skybet, the team that I picked up was feeling rough because they had like pressure to launch a product that was effectively a startup within Skybet. They had like there's some teams where the relationship was a bit broken, and so my team were feeling really like cornered, if you like, and like they thought they'd been treated badly, and it was just one of those circumstances coming together situations. But it meant that it's really important for me to build trust with that team very, very quickly and to help unpick all of that, which I did a fair bit of. But one of the ways that I built trust with them was I started an anonymous feedback mechanism because there was lots of kind of suspicion and concern from the team about what was going on. And so I literally created a box, like a shoe box with a hole in the top where people could put pieces of paper in. And I committed that I think it was Mondays, but I'm not sure, every Monday I would take a photo of all the stuff that was in there and I'd put it on a slide in an all hands and I would answer the questions live. And the trust that you get from doing that kind of thing is huge. And I got some funny things like people printed out Dilbert cartoons and pretty much wrote my name pointing at Dilbert and things like that, and all sorts of other stuff. But also like actually that was probably useful as well. I can't remember what the point was it was making, but lots of really useful stuff that even if it wasn't accurate about what was really going on, it was accurate that was how the team were feeling. And a lot of how the team were feeling was my job, right? And down to understanding how all this stuff was fitting together. And so you have to be pretty thick-skinned and you have to be able to separate what is accurate feedback on you or the situation versus what is just a perception. But both of those are valuable. And so that kind of anonymous feedback thing is something that I've been very keen on ever since. It's worked really, really well. I've also seen like my direct reports struggle with it because you'll get like when people are anonymous, they let rip. They do not hold back on their feedback. And so you've got to really be able to take those punches. But it is so valuable. So even now, like, I'd always want to make sure that the anonymous option is turned on in Google Meet so people can ask questions anonymously. Like this happened on Friday, thinking about it. And I think that's a really, really valuable way to do it. So that's one of my favorites. And the other one, well, I suppose there's probably three. Like the obvious one is like you do regular surveys of your team and all that kind of stuff, and I guess and really internalize some of that stuff, treat it very seriously, which some people don't. But we use a bunch of tools to run a pulse every few months, that kind of stuff. I used Office Vibe before; those things are important. But the one that I really like is I keep wondering about blogging this, and I'm trying to decide if I should name the person. I think I will. But I have this saying, which is "Who's your Sarah?" And Sarah was my kind of people partner under a different title, but the kind of people-focused person that partnered with my team in a previous job. And at the time, like we were under a lot of pressure. I had a leadership team that was trying to form and trying to build trust, but lots of curveballs coming in left, right, and center. And what would happen is we'd have a meeting, and afterwards, Sarah would pull me aside and say, "What did you do that for? Like, do you not realize how that message sounded? Or you could have gone much louder with that positivity. They need to hear that. Or I think you're in the right here, and I know you're getting some negative feedback from the team, but I think like you're being balanced, you're being fair. Just chin up, carry on." And that kind of trusted and how do I describe you? Someone that was willing to really tell you how it was and not sugarcoat it. And that meant that sometimes build me up and sometimes tear me down. It was incredibly successful, and I've tried to replicate that ever since. So my EA was called Evelyn until recently, and now called Chelsea. That's switching EA, not changing a name. And so like that relationship is really important to me. Someone that sees so much that goes on. So how are they going to give me feedback? Are they going to call it out? And also I have a people partner here as well called Ash, who's always pinging me with kind of interesting insights and challenging questions. And I think those kind of things really, you have to build those trusted relationships with people that know that they can say the hideous thing to you and that you're not going to be that leader that that can't take it, or that it have repercussions for them or something stupid like that. So those are probably the really key things that I use to kind of tune in.
Yeah, I love that. That I didn't realize that you meant literally a box with a hole in it that you wanted people to kind of. And I love that people were printing things off and taking the mick out of you.
We did turn it digital eventually, but it started
Yeah.
out literally a box
No,
on
I love
paper.
that. I think that's a great idea, especially because there's kind of another level to that, isn't there? About you can kind of take it physically of what's in front of you and what people are writing on the paper. But then if you've got people kind of joking around with it and printing off certain things with it, then that in itself kind of gives you a reflection of the morale and how they feel towards you. If everyone's kind of giving kind of solemn, kind of vague phrases, then that's almost like a negative bit of feedback because it's kind of surface level. So there's a really good way to read into that, and I really like that you did that. And especially with your EAs as well. Sometimes tough love is the best way, isn't it? And we all need something like that to kind of take us down a peg sometimes if we need it. So I've just got kind of two more things I want to touch on, and they're both kind of getting a little bit of wisdom from your experience and from your career. And it's essentially kind of what advice would you have for tech professionals who want to be where you are, and then kind of the last part of what I want to talk to you about is kind of what advice again would you have for people kind of in a leadership role, or who want to move into a leadership role that's particularly in a really fast moving place, like for example, obviously cryptocurrency is constantly changing, like you said. So yeah, it's kind of like two parts to that question, so I'll throw you a little bit of a curveball at the end. But yeah, what advice do you have for tech professionals who want to be maybe a CTO, a little bit more generically, and then also what kind of advice do you have for people who want to maybe move into cryptocurrency or something like that kind of environment?
Okay. Someone said to me relatively recently, probably in the past year or so, that I'm not the typical CTO. I think it was meant as a compliment, but who knows? But I think that the reason for that was that I'm quite people focused and I'm quite commercial. And now, actually, I think that is quite typical of CTOs, or should be, when you get to a certain size. But the point is that in smaller companies, the CTO is perhaps actually much more technical than I am. In fact, I had questions from the team in the past month or so about, like, Simon's never committed any code to our repositories. And yeah, that's true. And actually, I would love to. But the reality is there's a whole bunch of other things that are my day job that need doing, and there are better people to write code. Now, that might be completely different in a company quarter the size, where actually what they need is someone that's really leading from the front. And so I think just be aware that the job of CTO is very different. If there's 100 people in the company, 500, 2,000, 10,000, like, there's quite different jobs and it evolves. So that's definitely one thing I would say. But I think there's still a good pattern here whereby breadth is really important. And so that kind of leadership, technology, and commerciality perhaps are the things that I would be trying to build out. And I was just unbelievably lucky that people took a gamble on me and gave me opportunities over my career to move into things that I was probably questionably qualified for, if not completely unqualified. And I had an opportunity to learn from great people there. And so even now I try and challenge myself with, I hate it when you're told you can't do something. So it was really funny when I was a technical consultant. If I started trying to talk business, people would be like, "You're the techie, get in the corner." And then suddenly, like 3 days later, I was in a business role and I had a technical wing person. And if I tried to talk about technical stuff, they wait, you're the business guy. What are you doing? And I think it's so funny. Like, a job title can people feel like it defines you, and I think it's unfair if you don't let people jump around. So I try and make sure I do let people broaden their experience. And so I guess I would encourage you to look for opportunities to be exposed to more than just the technology piece. If I'm assuming most people that go for a CTO role are coming from a very kind of tech engineering style background. So ask questions about the why and the how. understand how the company makes money, care about what compliance needs there are, those kind of things really helps you tune into not only what the business needs, but actually how you can do your job better. Because if you understand the problem better, then actually there's different solutions from a technology point of view. So that's one thing. And the leadership side is really just about, I guess, everything I've been talking about, being really intentional about your leadership style and really actually caring about people and developing some empathy and understanding that when people respond and react to situations, like don't be triggered by those, because their experience of what's going on is different to yours, and it's worth taking a step back and understanding. And generally, people have got good intentions. So I think like building across that platform is good. And then the other one perhaps is I was listening to a podcast by a product person over the weekend when mowing the lawn, one of my favorite moments for podcasts. And they were talking about when you're thinking about becoming a CPO, what would you do? I can't remember who it was that was speaking, but they were saying run through it in your own head before you're there. Like, what would you do right now? And I think that's a really valid question. But the problem is, what you often find is people say everyone's unhappy because, I don't know, there isn't enough learning budget, or they're not paid enough, is probably the classic one. So I'd give everyone a pay rise and quote budget. But that's probably not realistic in a lot of companies because there's a defined budget. And so I think be disciplined, look at what your boss is doing, think about how you would do it better, but with realistic constraints, like what would you do? And I think it's a really good kind of thought exercise. And it's hard, but it's fun as well. And it makes you feel good if you come up with some good ideas. So I think that's pretty key.
Yeah.
So what was the other part to your question about changing environment?
Because I just kind of get the impression that because I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about crypto, that it's not my forte, but I just get the impression that the world of cryptocurrency and maybe Luno isn't necessarily chaotic, but I just imagine there's never a dull moment. And I imagine that kind of role in that kind of industry would differ to a lot of other industries. And I just wondered if you had advice for anybody who's looking to get into that specific kind of sector, if you will.
Yeah, I think cryptocurrency is definitely, like, because it's such an emerging space, there's definitely all sorts of curveballs. But I also think it's just the stage of the companies. So even back when I was working with some of those consumer partners at Microsoft, some of them were much smaller than they are now, and they were going through similar kind of like changes in direction, changes in the market, changes in regulation, all sorts of things like that. And so I think and Skybet was like really fast paced, lots of change, but it was in order to be competitive and to remain competitive. And so I think a very positive story if you harness it well. But perhaps with cryptocurrency, like especially over the past year or so, there's been a lot of shifts in the market. There's really bad things that have happened by some bad people, and probably some unlucky as well. And I guess with those, I would say be prepared is probably one of the key things. And I don't mean to say that too cynically. It's easy to say make sure you thought of everything. I don't mean that. But like, for example, we knew that there would be, so we know that the crypto market goes up and down and up and down. It's probably in a middle down at the moment. It will go up again in the future is our assumption. That's not investment advice, by the way. So planning like what happens when it goes down and having an idea about what you would do. And especially when we saw fallout from some of the exchanges that went bust and things like that. And I can't remember quite when it was timeline wise. Was it at the end of last year, maybe? We had a moment where we thought that, okay, so what do we do here? What's going to matter to our customers? And customers, there's a concern. They could think, well, wait a minute, what if there's something wrong with Luno as well? So we need to make sure we give them that confidence, and that what we can't afford is for our systems to go down because everyone will think, whoa, is something wrong with Luno? So immediately we slow down a bit on product development and pushing out releases. We increase our quality bars. We increase the number of people that we've got on call so we can respond to instance, all those kind of things. So it was kind of real practical, impending scenarios that could happen. Let's make sure we're prepared. And I think it's good just to do that kind of thought exercise, and think about perhaps the biggest risks that could come your way for how you deal with that kind of stuff. And that might be risks like, the market's tanking or something's happened, or it could be what if our priorities suddenly shift? Like how would we handle a sudden shift in priorities if we got the people in the right place and we need to move them quickly? Is our team structure set up that we could do that kind of thing? And so it isn't all kind of big bad threat kind of stuff. It's useful to explore that a bit in your mind, I think. I do think with a lot of that stuff that you need to bear in mind the people. So the thing that I still get negative feedback on change management because sometimes you just got to move fairly quickly on stuff. But hopefully less negative feedback than I used to get on it because I'm learning to get better at it. And there's something about how you bring people on a journey and how you give them context as to why you're changing things and you give them notice about things are going to change. We're going to refocus this team from this thing to this thing because we believe that there's a 10x business opportunity there compared to that one, or this country has changed some regulations, so we need to make sure that we're plugging that gap because it's incredibly important to us that we're adhering to regulations and that kind of thing. So like those kind of stories about this is why we're going to do it and this is when it's going to happen, I think it's important to kind of bring them along on that journey and empower them. And then my last piece of advice is just chill. I think like change happens, don't panic. One of my other leadership philosophy things is do the right thing. And I think sometimes when you get like a curveball of we've decided we're not launching X product that we've been working on for 3 months, then it's so easy to have the initial reaction of like, but that's my baby, I've been working on it for so long, like what are you thinking? Leadership have gone mad, that kind of thing. And just taking a breath, taking a step back, thinking it through. The world's still turning tomorrow. The right thing for the business is to crack on. And I think just that kind of, as you progress into various leadership levels, having that kind of rooted stability and ability to kind of take things as they come and still focus on, okay, what is the right thing to do for the business? What's the right thing to do for by the people? How do we get there from where we are right now? That's take a breath and it always works out fine.
I love that. What a lovely kind of word to end on. That's just chill. Because as you were talking, I was like, it's such a reactive industry by the sounds of it, and you really need the ability to be super reactive and be able to handle a lot of change. And it all sounds quite high intensity kind of role. But then just chill. I love that. I love that advice. Honestly, Simon, it's been, I can't believe that I think this is probably the first full-hour episode, and I had absolutely no idea that it had been an hour until just checking at the end of our conversation there, and I was like, it's been the fastest hour I think I've ever had because it's been such a lovely episode. I'm just going to quickly wrap up, and honestly, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real treasure having you on, and I think we've covered absolutely loads as well, and it's been genuinely really interesting to hear about you, and you've been a really, really lovely guest. So thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure. Thank you.
For lovely. If you're watching over on YouTube, you can hover over the logo in this corner and hit subscribe. Follow us on Amicus Jobs on socials, and check out our website for all the other episodes and tech roles from around the globe. Simon, thank you so much once again.
Thank you. See you.